Hi Year 7, Mr. Tapley here to walk you through your next lesson of Year 7 Humanities in Week 5, Term 2. So this lesson, we're looking at note-taking skills. So in our previous lessons, we've been developing our knowledge. This lesson, we're going to be using that knowledge, applying that knowledge into some skills. So, developing our understanding of the different types of work and practicing our note-taking skills is the learning intention. And our success criteria is to define and differentiate between the different types of work and workers and effectively summarize information in Chapter 20.9. So some of the information in this chapter, in Chapter 20.9, that we'll be using should be familiar because we've looked at the different types of work in previous lessons. Some of the information will be new. Chapter 20.9 is a pretty big chapter. There's a few pages in there. So when we went over that information in the slides, I offered a selective amount of information. I didn't want to give you all the information at once. I thought that was too much for one lesson. So what we'll be doing this lesson is two things. Basically reviewing that knowledge. So it'll be a good opportunity to test your knowledge of different types of workers. It'll be a good opportunity to expand your knowledge, so a bit further, a few new facts and statistics and etc. And also the main thing we're focusing on this lesson is practicing our note-taking skills. So I'll talk about that now. So, the difference between copying everything or nothing on a slide or textbook page or website versus taking effective notes, so really good notes, that summarize and highlight the important information in your own words is huge. All capital letters. It's very important. When I was in high school, I was probably guilty of, and my teacher would call me out on this, he would say, if you've highlighted everything, you've highlighted nothing. If the entire page is just one giant highlighter blob, I've highlighted every word, every sentence, every picture, I haven't really taken effective notes. I've just made it more colorful. What I want is effective notes that summarize. So I take all that information in the textbook or in the slides and I minimize it. So I'm making it smaller, easier to read, easier to understand. So effective notes that summarize and highlight the important information in your own words is huge. So that's essentially what I do every day when I'm making these slides. Is I go through the textbook, I go through videos, other resources, and I think, okay, how can I summarize that? How can I take a lot of information and fit it onto one PowerPoint slide and then highlight the important information in your own words? And again, I do that in these slides. You can see I've highlighted and bolded the word highlight just to try and give you guys the idea that that's an important part of the slide. So that's essentially the difference between good notes and bad notes is summarizing and highlighting. The ability to effectively take notes will help you at school and in life. So you take notes at school, obviously, hopefully. You'll take notes at university or at your first job, in meetings. If you guys watch behind-the-scenes footage of sports clubs, footy players, they're taking notes in meetings, watching games, like, oh, I did that differently this time, whatever. So it's an effective and valuable skill to have in life, which is why we're telling you this probably not for the first time. So I apologize if you've had something similar said to you in English or in year 6 or whatever. So if you rewrite information in your own words as opposed to just copying down information, there's a difference between taking notes and copying notes. You'll find it easier to remember because it's what you've thought of. It's your thoughts. It's easier to remember your thoughts than someone else's. It'll improve your understanding. Again, you're going to remember something and understand something if you're the one who came up with it, as opposed to the textbook or Mr. Tapley. And you'll be creating study notes for your future self. That was how I got through VC. It was basically in every lesson or after every lesson, I'd go through the textbook, I'd go through the research tasks that we'd done in class, and I would just copy down notes. And I would always limit myself to, okay, I'm only going to use half a page or 1 page for this lesson. That way when we got to the assessments or the exams, my mates would be like, oh man, I've got to study chapter 1 through 8. And I would have like half a dozen pages. So I've summarized the information, I've made it smaller. In those notes, I've used highlighters and different colored pens to highlight the important information. And I've written it in my own words. So those are the 3 main things we probably want to do when we're taking notes in class or out of class. So we want to summarize, highlight, and then write it in your own words. And those study notes, again, you just don't think of it as extra work that you're doing in class, because you should be doing in class anyway, it's not extra. Think about how you're making your life much easier in the future. It's work now, so you've got way less stress and way less work in the future. So, how are we going to test our note-taking skills? So chapter 20.9 talks about the different types of work. So some of that information, again, should be familiar because we've gone over it in the slides, full-time work, casual, volunteer work, etc. Some of the information will be new. Some of the information hasn't been taught to you before. So I want you guys to read through chapter 20.9, and then in your digital notebook, I want you to record 7 sentences that summarize the chapter information. So you're not allowed to just copy the entire textbook. You're not allowed to write 3 words. You guys have to say, okay, what are the 7 most important sentences in this chapter for me to understand chapter 20.9? So they may include key statistics, they may include definitions. I did a lot of definitions when I was taking notes because I thought that understanding those words would remind me of the words behind the words, if you know what I mean. So I'd remember the definition and be like, oh, that paragraph had that information in it. Anyway, it might have key concepts, so ideas, topics. It might have examples, and yeah, etc. Be selective. Don't write as much as possible or the first 7 sentences in the chapter. Again, I was probably guilty of that in high school as well. I'd be like, oh, that's important, and I'd realize I'd written 10 sentences worth of notes in the first 11 sentences in the page. So you have to be patient, be selective. Don't just write the first thing you see. Read through it, think about it, and write not as much as possible. Write what you believe is important. Write what you believe will help you understand the information. And a good way to test if you have effective notes is to close your textbook, look at the notes, and say, okay, do I understand chapter 20.9 just off these 7 sentences here? So that's the first half of what you're doing. The second half is completing questions 1 to 5 in chapter 20.9, exercise 1, check your understanding. And I'll show you where that is now. Go through those questions very quickly. So chapter 20.9, pardon me, talks about different types of work. So you can see full-time, part-time, casual. We've been over that in the slides. Talks about the different features of those types of work. It offers you a lot more kind of like detailed statistics and numbers about this stuff, which I thought was going to be really boring to read through the slides. So you're going to have to read through this and say, okay, this is the most important information. I'm going to put these numbers here. I'm going to ignore those numbers and write this definition here. And then when you get to the bottom of chapter 20.9, so that was the volunteer stuff we talked about, self-employment, you get to here. So chapter 20.9, exercise 1. So these are going to be, I wouldn't give you guys any more questions than you can handle in one lesson, so they're really quick, really straightforward, couple words, couple sentences for these questions here. So question 1, distinguish between paid and unpaid work. So what's the difference between a paid job or a paid work and unpaid work? Pretty straightforward. Question 2, how many hours a week must an employee work to be considered working full-time? So you just have to work through the notes that you've written down, work through the information in the textbook. You just need a number there. It's a double-digit number. That's my hint to you. So how many hours a week must an employee work to be considered working full-time? Question 3. List 3 examples of volunteer work. So not volunteer like groups like the Red Cross. Volunteer work. So helping homeless people. So don't give me the name of like a volunteer organization like we did in previous lessons. I want actual things that you would do at a volunteer group. Question 4. Match the following terms to the statements listed. So you can see they've got the different types of work, so full-time, part-time, casual. Match it up.